The grand hall of the Galactic Concord was filled with the murmurs of hundreds of alien diplomats. Towering insectoid creatures clicked their mandibles in amusement, reptilian beings flicked their tails in mockery, and the proud, elegant figures of the Exilari watched with barely concealed contempt. The meeting was supposed to be a discussion of trade agreements, technological advancements, and political alliances. But today, it had turned into something else. A joke. And the joke was humanity. Captain Elias Carter, the human representative, stood at the center of the room, feeling the weight of their laughter. He was tall by human standards, but looked unimpressive next to the towering forms of the other species. His uniform, neat and pressed, was a symbol of Earth's presence in the galactic community. But to these aliens, it might as well have been a clown's outfit. They are so fragile, one Silari ambassador whispered to another, their psychic voices spreading across the hall. Their bones break so easily. They live such short lives, a reptilian Korak snorted. A single cycle, and they are gone. How do they even manage to build a civilization? Perhaps they don't, a three-eyed alien from the Yalvik species said, grinning. Maybe they simply borrow everything from others. Laughter echoed through the chamber. Elias clenched his fists but forced himself to remain calm. Humans had been in the Galactic Concord for only a few years. Compared to these ancient civilizations, humanity was a child just learning to walk. The Exilari, in particular, were the most advanced, long-lived, telepathic, and technologically superior. They considered themselves the rulers of the stars. A Exilari noble, tall and dressed in shimmering blue robes, stepped forward. His silver eyes glowed with psychic energy as he addressed Elias. "Human," the noble said, his voice smooth and condescending. "We welcome your presence, though it serves no purpose. Your people are amusing, a curiosity in our great society. But tell us, what is it that you believe humanity offers to the galaxy?" Elias took a deep breath. He had prepared for this moment. He had known they would mock him, but he would not let their arrogance shake him. He raised his head and spoke clearly, his voice steady. "You misunderstand us," Elias said. "You see weakness where there is strength. You look at our short lives and see limitation, but we see urgency. You see our fragile bodies, but you do not see the resilience within. You look at our history and think we are primitive, but you do not understand what truly makes us powerful." The room fell silent, not because they respected his words, but because they were entertained. Another human speech, another attempt to prove themselves. They had heard it all before. "And what is this great power you speak of?" the Exilari noble asked, amused. "Our strength is not in our bodies," Elias said. "It is not in our technology. It is in our connections." Some of the aliens tilted their heads. Others smirked. "Connections," the Yalvik diplomat scoffed. "What nonsense." Elias continued, unfazed. "Humans are not the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the smartest species in the galaxy. We are not telepathic like the Exilari, nor are we as technologically advanced as the Vorkun. But we are something else. We form bonds. We fight for each other. We create alliances not because we must, but because we choose to. Our history is filled with struggles, yet we rise again and again, not alone, but together." The Exilari noble's expression remained unreadable, but Elias could feel the collective skepticism in the room. "Words," the noble said, "nothing more." "Then test us," Elias challenged. "You believe humans are weak because we rely on connection. Put us in isolation. See what happens. You may be surprised by the result." There was a pause. The Exilari exchanged glances, their telepathic minds communicating at speeds humans could never match. Then, the noble smiled. "Very well," he said. "Let us see if your words hold truth." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He had just thrown humanity into an experiment he could not control. The Exilari would test his claim, not to learn from it, but to prove him wrong. And humanity's fate would depend on what happened next. Dr. Lillian Moore sat in the cold, metallic chamber, staring at the gray walls that surrounded her. The room was large but empty, except for a single chair, a table, and a bed. There were no decorations, no windows, nothing to make it feel like home. It was not a prison, but it was not freedom either. The Exilari had placed her here as part of their experiment. They wanted to test how long a human could last in isolation, away from everything familiar. They believed humans were weak because of their need for connection. They wanted to prove that without their bonds, humans would break. She had been alone for 5 days now. At first, the silence had been unbearable. No voices, no music, no contact with anyone. Even the air felt lifeless, circulated through invisible vents with perfect efficiency. The Exilari did not speak unless necessary. They did not need conversation. They communicated through telepathic links. But Lillian, she was human. She needed interaction. She needed warmth. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the sounds of Earth, the chatter of people in a cafe, the laughter of friends, the rustling of leaves in the wind. It felt like a distant dream. Then, the door slid open. A tall, slender Exilari stepped inside. His silver robes shimmered under the artificial light. His skin was smooth and pale, his eyes glowing with psychic energy. He did not walk so much as glide across the floor, his movements effortless and graceful. This was Velith, the scientist assigned to observe her. "You are adapting," Velith said, his voice calm but emotionless. Lillian blinked. His words were unexpected. The Exilari rarely spoke unless they had something specific to say. "I suppose I am," she replied, her voice hoarse from lack of use. Velith tilted his head slightly, studying her like a researcher examining a strange creature. "Why?" Lillian exhaled and leaned back in her chair. "Because that's what humans do. We adapt." Velith seemed unsatisfied with the answer. He walked to the table and placed a small tray on it. There was food, nutrient cubes, auxiliary staple. No flavor, no texture, just sustenance. "You require nourishment," he said. Lillian picked up one of the cubes and examined it. "You know, humans don't just eat to survive. We enjoy food. We share meals. We make memories around a dinner table." Velith's expression remained unreadable. "I do not understand." "I know," Lillian said with a small smile. "That's the problem." She ate in silence while Velith observed. The Exilari did not eat in the same way humans did. They absorbed energy from nutrient-infused liquids, consuming only what was necessary. To them, food was not a source of pleasure or bonding. After a moment, Lillian put down the last cube and wiped her hands. "Why are you really here, Velith?" The Exilari's glowing eyes met hers. "To study you." She chuckled. "I figured that much. But why speak to me? Your kind communicates telepathically. Why waste words?" Velith hesitated for the briefest moment. Then he said, "I do not know." Lillian smiled at that. It was a small crack in the Exilari's cold exterior, but it was there. The first change. Over the next few days, Velith returned often. Sometimes, he asked questions about humanity. Other times, he simply observed her daily activities. But one thing was clear: he was spending more time with her than necessary. Lillian noticed small changes. When she spoke, he listened longer. When she asked questions, he no longer ignored them. He even sat down during their conversations instead of standing stiffly like before. One evening, Lillian was humming a tune, an old Earth melody her mother used to sing. She wasn't even aware she was doing it until she saw Velith watching her with curiosity. "What is that?" he asked. "A song," she said, "for communication." Lillian chuckled. "Not exactly. Music isn't about just sending information. It's about feeling something." Velith considered this. "Show me." She hesitated for a moment, then began to sing softly. The words were gentle, the melody soothing. For the first time, she saw something new in Velith's expression, not confusion, but curiosity mixed with something deeper. When she finished, there was silence. Then, Velith spoke in a voice quieter than before. "I have never heard anything like that." Lillian smiled. "That's because your people don't sing." Velith was silent for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. "Perhaps that is a mistake. A dangerous influence." Velith wasn't the only one changing. The auxiliary workers assigned to monitor the experiment had begun interacting with Lillian in small ways. The auxiliary technician, usually silent and detached, once adjusted the temperature in her room without being asked. Another left a small light device in her quarters, perhaps not realizing that a simple gift could mean so much to a human in isolation. The High Council had designed this experiment to prove humanity's weakness, but instead, something else was happening. The auxiliary were beginning to understand. And the High Council would not like that. Lillian knew she was no longer just a test subject. She was something more dangerous, an infection spreading through a species that had never known true connection. And she had no idea what would happen next. The silence of the auxiliary world was different now. It was no longer the cold, emotionless stillness that Lillian Moore had first experienced. There was something new, small, almost invisible, but present. Change. Lillian could feel it in the way the auxiliary workers glanced at her for a moment longer than usual. She saw it in the way they hesitated before leaving the room, as if considering saying something but unsure how. The High Council had expected her to break under isolation. Instead, she had started something they never predicted. A crack in the perfect, logical, detached world of the auxiliary. And at the center of that crack was Velith. An unspoken question. Velith stood in Lillian's chamber, his silver eyes glowing with quiet thought. He had come to observe her, just as he always did, but today felt different. He had not spoken yet. Instead, he seemed uncertain. Lillian leaned back in her chair, watching him with a small smile. "You look like you have something on your mind." Velith's gaze met hers. "Something is different." She raised an eyebrow. "With me?" "No." He hesitated, then said, "With me." Lillian set her cup down. It was a small metal cup. Nothing special, but it was one of the few things in this room that felt hers. She had started drinking warm water just to have the feeling of sipping something. It was a human habit, one the auxiliary didn't understand. But Velith had noticed. She studied him for a moment. "What's different?" Velith glanced at the closed door, as if checking that no one was listening. Then, for the first time since she had arrived, he sat down, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "I have never spoken to someone this much before," he admitted. Lillian chuckled. "That's not surprising. Your people don't really talk much, do they?" Velith tilted his head slightly. "We communicate through thought. Words are inefficient." "Then why do you keep talking to me?" Velith did not answer immediately. For a species that processed thoughts faster than any human could, hesitation meant something. Finally, he said, "Because I wish to." A dangerous realization. Lillian smiled, but inside, she knew this was dangerous. For him, for her, for all of them. The auxiliary had spent centuries perfecting their way of life. They avoided emotional attachments. They functioned as a society built on pure logic, efficiency, and control. But emotions were creeping in. Velith had chosen to talk to her, not because of duty, but because of curiosity. Maybe even something more. That kind of independent thought was not encouraged in auxiliary culture, and a High Council would never allow it. Lillian sighed. "Velith, if your people realize you're getting too close to me, they won't like it." He was silent for a long moment. Then he asked something unexpected. "Why do humans form bonds so easily?" Lillian thought about that. "Because we have to. We're not like the auxiliary. We don't live for centuries. We don't have psychic connections. We don't have all the knowledge of our ancestors in our minds. All we have is each other. That's how we survive. Velith considered her words. You believe connection is a necessity. She nodded. It's the most important thing we have. He stared at her, and for the first time, she thought she saw doubt in his expression. Not doubt in her words, but in his own beliefs. Then, before she could say more, the door slid open. A tall Xilari, dressed in dark robes, stood in the doorway. His silver eyes burned with intensity. Lillian had seen him before, one of the High Council's advisors. Velith immediately stood. The room felt colder. Velith, the advisor said in a calm, yet sharp tone. Come with me. Velith gave Lillian one last glance before following the advisor out. Lillian's heart pounded. She had seen that look before. The High Council knew, and they were not pleased. The first warning. Velith walked through the towering halls of the Xilari complex, the advisor leading the way. The walls shimmered with psychic energy, absorbing every sound. Finally, they stopped in a quiet chamber. The advisor turned. You are becoming distracted. Velith met his gaze. I do not understand. You do, the advisor said. The human experiment is meant to prove their weakness, not infect our own. Infect, Velith repeated. The advisor's silver eyes narrowed. Yes, she is a disruption. She introduces thoughts that should not exist, feelings that serve no purpose. Velith was silent. The advisor stepped closer. You are one of our finest minds, Velith. The High Council values you. Do not let this contamination corrupt you. Velith felt something strange, a flicker of emotion. Not fear, not anger, but defiance. Understood, he said. The advisor studied him for a moment, then nodded. Good. As the advisor left, Velith stood alone in the silent chamber. For the first time in his life, he questioned, not just his actions, but everything he had ever known. The growing storm. Lillian sat in her chamber, tapping her fingers against the table. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Velith had never been gone this long after one of their meetings. Had she pushed too far? Had the High Council decided to end the experiment? Then, the door slid open. Velith stepped inside. Lillian's breath caught. He looked the same, but something in his expression had changed. They are watching, he said quietly. We must be careful. Lillian swallowed. What did they say to you? Velith hesitated, then spoke words she never thought she would hear from a Xilari. They told me you are a danger. Lillian's heart pounded. Are you? Velith asked. She met his gaze and said softly, That depends on what you believe. Velith stood in Lillian's chamber, his silver eyes filled with something unfamiliar. Hesitation. The Xilari scientist who had once spoken with pure logic now seemed uncertain. The words of the High Council still echoed in his mind. She is a danger. But was she? Lillian sat on the edge of her bed, watching him carefully. She could tell that something had changed. He had never looked this troubled before. They don't trust me, she said quietly. Velith exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. No, they do not. Lillian smiled sadly. I figured as much. There was a long silence between them. Then Velith took a step forward. The High Council believes humans are weak because they rely on emotions. They think your need for connection is a flaw. Lillian tilted her head. And what do you think? Velith hesitated. I do not know anymore. The point of no return. As they reached the lower levels, Velith suddenly stopped. He raised a hand, signaling Lillian to halt. A Xilari guardian stood ahead. Unlike Velith, this one wore the dark armor of the enforcers, those loyal to the High Council. Lillian tensed. What do we do? She whispered. Velith didn't answer immediately. Then, in a calm voice, he said, I will handle it. Before she could protest, he stepped forward. The guardian turned, his silver eyes narrowing. Velith, you do not belong here. Velith kept his expression neutral. I was given orders to inspect this sector. The Guardian frowned. I received no such command. Velith's eyes glowed faintly. The air around them seemed to vibrate. The Xilari did not lie, at least not usually. The Guardian was trying to process something that should not be happening. In that brief moment of hesitation, Velith moved. He struck with a precise psychic pulse, not enough to harm, but enough to disable. The Guardian staggered, his body locking up as his neural pathways were disrupted. Velith caught him before he fell, gently lowering him to the ground. Lillian stared. You didn't. I did not harm him, Velith said quietly. But we must hurry. Lillian nodded, her pulse racing. They slipped past the unconscious Guardian and into the transport hub. There, in the dim glow of the station, freedom was within reach. But deep in her heart, Lillian knew this was only the beginning. A High Council would not let them go so easily. The transport hub was dimly lit, its smooth metallic floors reflecting the faint glow of energy conduits running along the walls. Lillian's breath was steady, but her heart pounded as she followed Velith deeper into the underground structure. The place was eerily quiet. No other Xilari were present. At least, not yet. Velith moved with purpose, his steps silent but swift. We must reach the control terminal. From there, I can override the security system. Lillian nodded, keeping close behind him. And what happens after that? Velith hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, we leave. Lillian caught the hesitation. You don't sound sure. Velith's silver eyes flickered with something unreadable. Because I do not know if we will succeed. It was the first time she had ever heard uncertainty in his voice, and that scared her more than anything. The last barrier. They reached a large metallic door, humming faintly with energy. Velith stopped and placed his hand on the scanner. A soft blue light passed over his fingers before a screen displayed an access prompt. Velith's fingers moved swiftly across the console. Lillian watched as rows of alien symbols flashed across the display. Then, error. Velith's jaw tightened. They have locked the system. Lillian's stomach dropped. Can you override it? Velith didn't answer immediately. His eyes flickered, processing. Yes, but it will take time. Time they might not have. Lillian turned to scan the corridor behind them. Every shadow, every faint hum of machinery felt like a warning. Then, a noise. Footsteps. Growing louder. They're coming, she whispered. Velith's fingers flew across the console. I need 30 more seconds. Lillian took a deep breath, her mind racing. There was nothing in this corridor to use as cover. If the Xilari enforcers arrived before Velith finished, they would be caught. She clenched her fists. No, I won't let that happen. Her gaze fell on a nearby energy conduit running along the wall. It pulsed faintly, carrying power through the station. An idea formed. Velith, keep working, she said. Without waiting for a response, she moved to the conduit and pressed her hand against it. The surface was warm, humming with energy. Human ingenuity. That's what they underestimated. Lillian grabbed a small metallic device from her pocket, something she had taken earlier from her chamber. It was a simple connector used for Xilari equipment, but she had modified it. She jammed it into the conduit. A spark, a flicker. Then, the lights dimmed. The corridor plunged into flickering shadows. The footsteps hesitated. Confused voices echoed through the halls. Velith's eyes widened slightly. That was unexpected. Lillian grinned. It bought us time, didn't it? Velith's fingers moved one last time over the console. Click. The door slid open. Run, he said. The chase begins. Lillian sprinted through the opening, Velith right behind her. The moment they crossed, the heavy metal doors began to seal again. From behind, the enforcers arrived. Stop them, a sharp voice commanded. Lillian turned just in time to see the dark armored figures rushing forward, but they were too late. The doors slammed shut with a hiss, locking them out. Lillian exhaled, trying to steady herself. That was close. Velith, however, was not relieved. His eyes were on the next challenge ahead. The transport bay. And the small fleet of Siluri ships waiting within. The impossible decision. Rows of sleek, silver ships lined the docking area, their designs smooth and streamlined. The Siluri rarely used them. Most of their travel was through controlled teleportation. But for an escape, this was their only option. Velith led her toward one of the smaller crafts. It was designed for efficiency, but it would serve their purpose. He placed his hand on the access panel, and the ship hummed to life. The hatch began to open. Then, alarms. Red warning lights flashed across the bay. A loud mechanical voice echoed in the air. Unauthorized access detected. Lillian's stomach turned. They know. Velith stepped onto the ramp, motioning for her to follow. We must leave. Now. Lillian rushed inside. The ship was unfamiliar, but Velith seemed to know exactly what he was doing. He moved to the controls, activating systems at an almost inhuman speed. The docking doors began to close. The enforcers had found another way in. Through the ship's external cameras, Lillian could see them, rushing toward the bay, weapons drawn. Her heart pounded. Velith. He didn't hesitate. The engines roared to life. Then, with a burst of energy, the ship lifted from the platform. A daring escape. The Siluri enforcers opened fire. Bright streaks of energy shot toward them, but Velith twisted the ship sharply. The blasts narrowly missed as the vessel shot toward the closing docking doors. Lillian gripped the side of her seat. We're not going to make it. Velith's eyes burned with focus. Yes, we will. The ship's thrusters flared, accelerating at an impossible speed. The closing doors were only a sliver of an opening now, barely enough for a ship to pass through. Lillian held her breath. Velith didn't slow down. At the last second, the ship twisted, spinning sideways as it slipped through the shrinking gap. The doors slammed shut behind them. Silence. Then, open space. Lillian let out a shaky breath. The blackness of space stretched out before them, dotted with distant stars. We did it, she whispered. But Velith wasn't celebrating. His hands were tight on the controls, his expression unreadable. Lillian followed his gaze. On the ship's scanners, a larger auxiliary vessel was already in pursuit, and it was gaining on them. Lillian clenched her fists. They escaped the city, but the chase was far from over. The small ship raced through the vast darkness of space, its engines burning bright against the endless void. Lillian sat in the co-pilot's seat, her fingers gripping the armrests. Her heart pounded as she stared at the scanner screen. The Siluri were coming. A massive ship, sleek and deadly, loomed behind them. It was twice the size of their vessel, moving with precision and power. They're gaining on us, Lillian said, her voice tight. Velith's silver eyes remained focused as his hands moved swiftly over the controls. I expected this. Lillian swallowed hard. And what's the plan? Velith didn't answer immediately. The ship jerked as he adjusted their course, weaving through the emptiness of space. Then he said, we outrun them. Lillian let out a nervous laugh. That's it. That's the plan. Velith gave her a sharp look. Unless you have a better one. Lillian opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had never piloted a spaceship before. Outrunning a superior enemy was not exactly her area of expertise. So she did the only thing she could. She trusted Velith. A race against time. The enemy ship was closing in. It was faster, more advanced, and armed with weaponry that could destroy them in seconds. Lillian's mind raced. Do we have weapons? Velith shook his head. This is a transport vessel. It was not designed for battle. Lillian clenched her jaw. Then how do we fight back? Velith's eyes flickered with thought. We do not fight. We outthink them. Lillian frowned. What do you mean? Velith tapped the control panel, pulling up a holographic map of the surrounding space. There is an asteroid field nearby, he said. We can lose them there. Lillian's stomach twisted. An asteroid field. Isn't that dangerous? Velith's expression remained calm. For them, yes. Lillian exhaled. For us. Velith didn't answer. Instead, he dived the ship downward, heading straight for the asteroid field. Through the storm. The moment they entered the field, everything changed. Massive asteroids, some the size of mountains, floated in the darkness. Some spun slowly, while others tumbled through space at terrifying speeds. Lillian gripped her seat tighter. This is insane. Velith's hands were steady on the controls. Trust me. Behind them, the auxiliary ship hesitated for a split second before following. Lillian saw it on the scanner. They're coming in after us. Velith's lips pressed into a thin line. Then let us give them a proper challenge. He twisted the ship sharply, weaving through the floating debris with incredible precision. Lillian felt her stomach turn as they narrowly avoided a massive asteroid that passed inches from their hull. The enemy ship followed, but it was larger, less maneuverable. Velith took advantage of that. He darted between the rocks, moving unpredictably. The enemy ship tried to follow, but it was struggling to keep up. Lillian saw the moment their pursuers made a mistake. A large asteroid, spinning fast, drifted into their path. The enemy ship couldn't turn in time. It clipped the rock. A bright explosion burst in the distance as part of the auxiliary ship's hull was torn apart. Lillian gasped. Did we just? Velith shook his head. They are damaged, but not destroyed. We must keep going. Lillian turned back to the scanner. The auxiliary vessel was still there, limping but still in pursuit. They're not giving up, she muttered. Velith exhaled slowly. Then we go deeper. The trap. They pushed further into the asteroid field, dodging and weaving through the deadly maze. Then, without warning, Velith cut the engines. Lillian's eyes widened. What are you doing? Velith leaned forward, watching the scanner. Wait. Lillian held her breath as their ship drifted silently. The auxiliary vessel, still damaged, continued forward. Its pilots were desperate to catch them. Then, it happened. A massive asteroid, nearly invisible in the darkness, drifted directly into their path. The auxiliary tried to turn. Too late. The asteroid slammed into their hull, sending them spiraling out of control. A second explosion erupted as the ship collided with another rock, breaking apart. Lillian's eyes widened as she watched the scanner. They're gone, she whispered. Velith nodded slowly. For now. Lillian exhaled, feeling the weight lift from her chest. That was incredible. Velith turned to her, his silver eyes calm. You were the one who trusted me. Lillian smiled faintly. I guess I did. She looked out into the dark expanse of space. They were free. But she knew this was only the beginning. The unknown awaits. With the enemy gone, Velith restarted the engines. The ship hummed back to life, gliding smoothly through the asteroid field. Lillian leaned back in her seat, exhaustion hitting her all at once. So, where do we go now? Velith was silent for a long moment. Then, he said, somewhere the auxiliary cannot find us. Lillian raised an eyebrow. And where is that? Velith's lips twitched in the smallest hint of a smile. With humans. Lillian blinked. You want to go to Earth? Velith nodded. If I am to understand your kind, I must see your world. Lillian's heart skipped a beat. A auxiliary, going to Earth. That was something no one had ever done before. She smiled. Well then, let's go home. Velith turned back to the controls, setting a new course. Their journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The small ship glided through the silent expanse of space, heading toward an unfamiliar destination. Earth. Lillian sat in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes fixed on the blue planet slowly growing larger on the screen. Velith, silent as always, adjusted the controls, guiding the ship through the gravitational pull. His silver eyes flickered with thought, scanning the data before him. "You've never been here before, have you?" Lillian asked. Velith shook his head. "No auxiliary has." Lillian smiled. "Well, I guess you're about to be the first." Entering Earth's atmosphere. The ship trembled as they entered the planet's atmosphere. Flames licked at the edges of the hull as they pierced through the sky, the pressure increasing every second. Lillian gripped her seat tightly. "Please tell me you know how to land this thing." Velith's voice remained calm. "I am adapting." Lillian's stomach dropped. That is not very reassuring. But to her surprise, the ship leveled out, the flames dying away as they broke through the thick clouds. Below them, Earth stretched out in all its beauty. Vast blue oceans, towering mountains, and endless green landscapes. Lillian felt her chest tighten. She was home. Velith, however, was focused on the readings. There are auxiliary signals on this planet. Lillian's breath caught. "Wait, what?" Velith's eyes narrowed. "We are not alone." An unseen threat. Velith guided the ship toward a secluded valley, surrounded by dense forests. They landed smoothly, the engines hissing as they shut down. Lillian unstrapped herself and stood up. "If there are auxiliary here, we need to find out what they're doing." Velith nodded. "Agreed." As they stepped outside, the fresh air filled Lillian's lungs. The cool wind brushed against her skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was standing on her own planet. Velith looked around, his sharp eyes scanning the area. "We must be cautious." Lillian nodded, but before she could respond, a rustling sound came from the trees. They were not alone. A dangerous encounter. Lillian and Velith turned toward the sound, their bodies tense. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a human. He was dressed in dark combat gear, his weapon raised. His expression was one of shock and suspicion. "Who are you?" he demanded. Lillian raised her hand slowly. "Easy, we're not enemies." The man's eyes flicked toward Velith, his grip tightening on the weapon. "And him?" Velith remained calm, his voice steady. "I am not your enemy either." More figures appeared behind the man, all dressed in similar combat gear, a human resistance force. Lillian's heart pounded. They didn't trust Velith, and she understood why. Proving themselves. The leader of the group stepped forward. His name, he said, was Commander Harris, and he was part of a secret Earth resistance that had been fighting against hidden auxiliary operations. "The auxiliary have been here for years," Harris said, his eyes never leaving Velith. "They think we don't know, but we do." Lillian's stomach twisted. Why didn't they attack? Harris narrowed his eyes. "Because they don't need to. They'd been working in the shadows, waiting for the right moment." Velith frowned. "This is not our way. The auxiliary value direct conquest, not secrecy." Harris scoffed. "Then tell me, why are they here?" Velith didn't answer immediately. He was thinking, calculating. Then he said, "They must have another purpose, something greater than war." Lillian turned to Harris. "Then we need to stop them." Harris studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We have intel on auxiliary base. If you're serious about helping, prove it." Velith met his gaze. "We will." The final stand. That night, Lillian and Velith joined the resistance on their mission. They moved through the dense forest, shadows among the trees. Ahead, a hidden auxiliary outpost pulsed with alien energy. Tall structures loomed in the darkness, their technology humming softly. Harris turned to Lillian. "Are you sure about this?" Lillian took a deep breath. "Yes." Then the attack began. Explosions rocked the ground as resistance fighters rushed the base, their weapons blazing. Auxiliary forces, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Velith moved swiftly, his knowledge of auxiliary systems proving invaluable. He disabled shields, shut down defenses, and turned their own technology against them. Lillian fought alongside the resistance, dodging enemy fire as they pushed forward. The battle was fierce, but in the end, They won. The base was destroyed. The auxiliary's secret was exposed. And for the first time, humanity had the upper hand. A new alliance. As the smoke cleared, Lillian stood beside Velith, looking at the ruins of the outpost. "This was only the beginning," Harris said. "There are more bases, more threats." Lillian nodded. "Then we'll stop them." Harris studied her, then looked at Velith. "And him." Lillian glanced at Velith. He had proven himself today. He wasn't like the others. He had chosen them. "He's with us," she said firmly. Harris hesitated, then extended his hand. "Then welcome to the fight." Velith looked at the offered hand, then slowly shook it. For the first time in history, a human and auxiliary stood side by side, not as enemies, but as allies. The future awaits. That night, as they prepared for the next battle, Lillian turned to Velith. "You had a choice," she said. "You could have left, but you stayed." Velith's silver eyes reflected the stars. "Perhaps I believe in something greater now." Lillian smiled. "Humanity." Velith's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. Hope. As the stars shined above them, Lillian knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Humanity had been mocked. But now, they had an unexpected ally. And together, they would change the fate of the galaxy.